down the stretch when half the running backs in the NFL are hurt and people are dying to put anybody with a pulse in their lineup, if you can bring this kid out of the bullpen and, he's going to be the future of the Panthers offense more than likely for the next few years, I think that's a savvy move.
There are always seasons within the season. So I'm thinking Jonathon Brooks, love him for season 3, 4, and 5 of 2024, but do not use him seasons 1 and 2.
Yes. Keep him in your back pocket, just like FantasyPoints.com. What?
Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
On today's episode, what we're going to do here is look at some of the news of the day. Training camps are open. I got a couple of hot stories I want to get John's take on. This week saw 3 wide receivers get paydays: Tyreek Hill, Amari Cooper, and Courtland Sutton. The funny thing, John, none of these deals added any new years. It was just more money. And I like all of these guys this year. Obviously, Hill's a no-brainer top 5 pick. We don't really have to discuss much of him. But Amari Cooper, he's coming off another one of these 70-catch, 1,200-yard seasons, and Sutton might be the cheapest of all 3 of them in terms of ADP. He's got a new quarterback and not much competition around him. I pulled up the roster here, and it's like Marvin Mims and Tim Patrick, who's always hurt, and got a rookie in Troy Franklin.
Reynolds.
The king of the Jags, Josh Reynolds. So I'm kind of in on those guys. So of the 3 guys getting money here, any thoughts on any of those guys for fantasy this year?
Sutton, I've got him priced on my cheat sheets on the website right at his ADP of wide receiver 49. I'm kind of waiting around because, he's been looking to get a new deal and or maybe traded. You said it didn't add any years. I mean, he is the default quarterback or wide receiver, but who is the quarterback? Because early on, it looks like Jarrett Stidham has got a little bit of a leg up here on the rookie. So I don't know if that's necessarily good for Courtland Sutton. I think at this point, we know what Jarrett Stidham is. Not overly excited, but certainly he is their number 1 receiver, and they don't use the tight end much. I know Greg Dulcich, I haven't checked in the last 24 hours or so, but he's actually practicing, and there's some optimism about him. Could be a little bit of a committee there at tight end. But yeah, I'm more into Marvin Mims. Honestly, I think when we look at it, Troy Franklin is a pretty smart kid. I did sit down with him at the combine, but yeah, he seems like kind of like what Jalen Hyatt was for the Giants last year. Like, he'll get some opportunities, ramp him up as the season progresses, but probably not going to be much of a needle mover. Of course, little Jordan Humphrey is out there balling, apparently having a pretty good camp. But for me, it's all Marvin Mims. Can he ascend to, the second option in the passing game? That's a big ask, but not as big as it would be on some other teams with better receiving cores, because they really don't have a clear second option. It may even default to Josh Reynolds, the veteran, but he's also new to the team. At least Marvin Mims has been in Sean Payton's offense for a full year.
Tim Patrick is one of those guys who, when he's healthy, always seems to be around the lineup. It wouldn't shock me at all if he was healthy, if all of a sudden Tim Patrick became a thing. As he's just starting in 11 personnel groupings and getting a little work outside. He'll be one of those annoying guys where you're like, well, now we're not feeding Sutton, who we paid all this money to, and we can't get Marvin Mims to do anything more than win sprints down the field. Like, let's get rid of him and let's just focus on the 2 main guys here. But alas,
yeah, I mean, you hate those scrappy, annoying overachiever types because they dilute the waters for us. I mean, they're like Mac Hollins. That's why I started that segment. Go away. It's like, go away, dude. You're ruining it for everybody else.
John, this kind of made some news on Twitter over the weekend. So the Packers had this family night. It's big practice. A lot of these teams do this, where you can go and everybody can watch the practice. And someone charted the snaps with the first string offense. Romeo Doubs, he led all the Packers receivers with 21 snaps. Christian Watson right there with him with 19. And then Jaden Reed, the first Packer off the board in terms of ADP, only 16 snaps. So he's getting the third most. And then way down the board, Dontavian Wicks. I mean, I'm so over this Dontavian Wicks thing, by the way. Everyone's hyping him up.
Yeah,
He's not going to make it
he's
unless
good,
somebody gets
guys. He's
hurt.
good.
Yeah. He's good. He's
He's
just
good, but he's not going to start.
no, there's a lot of guys there. So here's my question to you. Is the answer to this Packers receiving room or Packers fantasy in general just draft Jordan Love? Because I don't know, week to week, it's going to be so hard to figure out. Is it Watson week? Is it Wicks? Is it Dobbs? I mean, Dobbs had like 7 touchdowns last year. He can get in the end zone. And then Jaden Reed kind of, taking handoffs, do a little Debo Samuel impression out there.
Yeah.
I don't know where to go with this wide receiver group, but I know I like Jordan Love.
Yeah, I mean, that's an easy thing to default to for sure. Let's not forget Tucker Kraft, the second tight end. I think he opened on the NFI list, but I don't think that's going to be real serious. So we got 2 very viable tight ends. And we haven't even brought up our friend Bo Melton, who scored a touchdown in the NFC title game from Jordan Love last year. Oftentimes I default to the cheapest option, but while I do respect Romeo Dobbs, I mean, 2 years ago, I guess, when maybe it was 3 at this point, I was all over Romeo Dobbs in the May of that year, and he was impactful. I watched him at the Senior Bowl. We actually comped him a little bit to Devontae Adams, which I know was a little bit of a stretch, but hey, Devontae Adams was never a burner to begin with, inside, outside guy. But I will say, while he really did click with Jordan Love, like they've got a nice chemistry there, he is boring. Like if he doesn't score, he's just not going to pile up the catches of the yard. So I look at it and I like kind of the best of both worlds with Watson. I mean, he's clearly not the most expensive. And, he's second. He's second. But I like him the most. When you look at Jaden Reed, let's call his ADP 72. Christian Watson is 102. And then let's call Dobbs 118. I'm going Watson there. Jaden Reed might be a little overpriced, but I'd probably say he's the safest guy. And then Dobbs is just kind of there. Like, I feel like Dobbs will get hurt the most by a guy like Wicks or Bo Melton because, Watson is that big prototypical guy, commands the ball. He's a unicorn, really. I mean, physical marvel. And then Jaden Reed's got that inside outside versatility, that Debo stuff. I think Wicks, if he plays, will play likely over Dobbs. I think a lot of these guys are interchangeable, but when I look at the receiving core, I probably, and I am over the markets on Jaden Reed, but I am absolutely targeting Christian Watson. That's my guy here for the Packers in terms of receivers.
And he went out and made a big play in practice. And again, we're watching highlights on Twitter of one singular play, but he made a big spectacular catch on a deep fade down the sideline. And that's what you expect from a guy like Christian Watson. So I love that call. If you can get Christian Watson, maybe he's like your wide receiver 3. You could probably get him as your wide receiver 4 at this point in your home league. I think he's going to pay dividends and he's going to be in your lineup a lot. Let's go over to the LA Chargers. Justin Herbert sustained a foot injury in practice. That's going to keep him out of training camp for a couple of weeks. So they hope they can ramp him up, get him ready for the season opener. They also had an injury to Ladd McConkey. Now, he's had several foot issues over his career. I was kind of searching through the interwebs to find out more about Ladd McConkey, and he's a little injury prone, and especially on this right foot. So it's giving me a little pause here. So, all right, we know the offense is not going to be very dynamic, John. But it's still Justin Herbert. It's still, a Greg Roman offense. They're going to hopefully put up some points here. Do you have any interest in Herbert at all? And between McConkey and our guy, Josh Palmer, who would you rather pull the trigger on?
Not very interested in Herbert. We're still not sure what he is in terms of the running. Like, that's completely random. Yeah. Like, there are obviously no design runs or very, very few of those. And oftentimes, he goes, a month without really running much over the course of the last 2 or 3 years. So that's still to be decided. We know they're going to be run heavy. We know that Greg Roman has got some limitations. I mean, just look at the comments from some of the people who've left Greg Roman, like Hollywood Brown, not really
Mhm.
complimentary of the creativity and the route combinations that oftentimes help scheme receivers open. Doesn't really do all that. So yeah, I'm not expecting all that much. Now that said, they are going to be a professional offense. They have an excellent offensive line. And, Harbaugh was a quarterback for God's sakes, not like, the head coach is not about throwing the ball. So I do like Josh Palmer. I have been right around with the markets on Lad McConkey. I certainly like him as a prospect, but not like gung ho for Lad
Mhm.
McConkey because again, he's a little pricey. But I've been way, way, way over the market on Josh Palmer from like May, April, even before that. I currently have him with 66 grabs as my wide receiver 46. ADP is wide receiver 60. So that's about right. Like that's a pretty good distance, a really good distance, honestly. 140 overall. I would submit that Josh Palmer is one of my favorite picks on the board, period. At what's that, 12th round? Come on now. I mean, he is the only receiver here who really truly has a pretty established history with Justin Herbert. And, he's this a kind of a big year for him too, going into year 4. He's got inside outside versatility. If Ladd is inside, which I think he will be, I think Josh Palmer is your top outside receiver.
Yeah, and see a little DJ Chark also. We hear about him.
Yeah.
You've got him, as you
Yep.
mentioned, on the Guru cheat sheet. And again, folks, if you want just the Guru's cheat sheet, you've been living and dying with that for years. You can go to Fantasy Points, use code SCOREMORE, and get John's only cheat sheet. I got it pulled up right in front of me. You've got Josh Palmer one spot ahead of DeAndre Hopkins. And Hopkins is going to be out several weeks with a knee injury. That could bleed into the regular season. So at age 32, doesn't bode great for D-Hop. He's coming off a 1,000-yard season. He scored 7 touchdowns, caught 75 balls. We got this new look Titans team with Brian Callahan now as the head coach. They also brought in Calvin Ridley. So, but here's the thing. We're going to talk about your lessons learned later. One of your lessons in that is don't draft aging wide receivers unless they're Hall of Famers. I mean, is Hopkins maybe a borderline Hall of Fame guy? But with this injury now, are you taking the risk on him on a draft in early August when you might not see him for weeks?
No, I'm not. I was on the Sirius XM show on Friday before this news truly came down in terms of time missed. And I was like, that's it. Goodbye. I'm out already. I had heard from a little birdie maybe a month or two ago about, off-season talk that,
Mm.
maybe D-Hop was starting to slow down a little bit. Like some people starting to notice that. So, yeah, it's a little bit of a hedge. We're like, oh yeah, avoid a 30-year-old receiver unless he's a future Hall of Famer. And a lot of these guys that we're talking about, we care about them because they are maybe on the cusp, like Keenan Allen. But I would say D-Hop probably no in terms of the Hall. And correspondingly, I mean, it's kind of a joke to say it this way, but I'm not in. Like if he had a little bit better body of work leading up to this injury, and he was on track for Canton, maybe I'd look at him. Oh, maybe he'll be a value, but they'll probably start to move on from Hopkins with Calvin Ridley added as their new number 1 wide receiver. So he's not going to be peppered with targets even when he does return, I don't think.
This is an old wide receiver group. You're starting over here. You got this new young buck and Will Levis throwing a ball, and you get 2 30-plus-year-old wide receivers in Ridley and D-Hop out here. It'll be interesting to see how they kind of evolve over the years, and maybe next year bring in some young, fresh blood. But yeah, I've always been a Calvin Ridley guy. I remember they were going to bring him to Philly, and they wanted to trade for him, and then he got that injury he got suspended for the gambling issues
Yeah.
and stuff. And then it actually turned into, now Philadelphia gets AJ Brown. So I think Philly kind of lucked out in that regard. All right, let's keep it rolling here. We're talking wide receivers with the guru, Jordan Rodriguez of The Athletic, who is a tremendous follow. She does a fantastic job with the Rams. She noted that Puka Nacua left practice on Sunday and was spotted with a bag of ice on his right knee. So at the time of recording this, we have no idea what that means, folks. He could be totally fine, or he could be dead. Either way, you heard it here first, okay? But what I wanted to ask you about, John, is Cooper Kupp, because these camp reports are saying he looks back to 100%. He's killing it in practice. He's a guy you have at wide receiver 28 in your rankings. The ADP on him is like end of round 3. What are your realistic expectations for Kupp? Another kind of aging wide receiver here. Who is Cooper Kupp a Hall of Famer? That's another question.
Yeah. I think he's just going to miss it right now unless he can somehow log a number of highly impactful seasons, which I really don't really see that. I am very worried about the fact that he's got this pedal ankle issue that really dates back to 2022. And then it was an issue in 2023 last year, which maybe also had something to do with the ankle sprain. I had heard that, this looks like it's going to be a potential chronic issue for the rest of his career. So when I heard that, I was like, I'm done. This was last summer. And, while he did have some really good moments, I was like, ooh, hold on a second. Maybe he's going to be fine. Do you think the people who took him last year were pleased that they did? I don't think they were. Now he's a little cheaper this year. If Puka is going to miss some time, maybe he's got like a grade 2 MCL sprain or hyperextended knee or something. Maybe that helps just a little bit, but it doesn't shave off any of the years or the wear and tear that Cooper Kupp has dealt with. He's had a very busy career, man. I mean, 191 targets in 2021. I said that off season that it was the busiest season by a wide receiver in league history. And then he ended up missing 8 games the next year. So 31 years old now. I just don't see myself taking him because even though he's dropped down the board a little bit, there will be younger dudes available when he's going off the board. I'll even look it up right now in terms of who I'd rather take right where Cooper Kupp is going off the board. Let's take a look. I mean, maybe even the aforementioned Calvin Ridley, but no. What is his ADP right now? Is it about 30?
Oh, what do we got? His
Here.
ADP. He's like, he's
Oh,
like
here it is. 41, 42.
38.
Yeah, 38, 40. Let's call it 40. I'll take Skinny Batman over him. I like, obviously, Pittman over him. I like Christian Kirk over him.
I love Christian Kirk this year. Here's the guy. Let me throw this at you because you got him back to back in your rankings. How about Malik Nabers of the Giants? Hearing a lot of talk about him being the guy in New York, getting peppered with targets, and they don't have much else. It's him. It's Wan'Dale Robinson, who I love late. But what do you think between those two? If you're on the board, third round, Kupp and Nabers staring at you. You need a receiver.
I'd probably have to go with the young guy because that's, I feel like we've seen it over and over again. Like the wheels fall off wide receivers for the most part, unless you're a future Hall of Famer. I mean, it's not like a hedge. By the way, there is a guy that might buck the trend a little bit. We'll get into Brandon Cooks, but I'd have to go to answer the question. I am paranoid about drafting an old guy who falls off a cliff. I mean, that's the bottom line. I think that's the biggest mistake that I could make. And that all started, by the way back in 1987. Back in 1987, when my first pick, and I actually forgot about this for like a decade and a half, but my first pick of all time was a bad pick, a washed up Walter Payton. In my defense, I had just learned of the draft and this thing called fantasy football 1 hour beforehand. So I went in there and I think I had like the 9th pick. And I'm like, yeah, give me Walter Payton because he's good, but that didn't work out. And I honestly have kind of overcorrected ever since becoming an ageist.
All right. Speaking of ageist, there's a hot young rookie in Carolina at running back, Jonathon Brooks. He's not going to play in the preseason, and it sounds like head coach Dave Canales could be leaning towards not really playing him much the first few games of the season. So, John, let's say he doesn't have an early season role. Is he still somebody in our drafts we want to maybe later on just get him, put him on the bench? We're going to stash him there because the competition to leapfrog to get into the starting lineup is Chuba Hubbard and Miles Sanders. So it's not exactly a bunch of world beaters here. So what are your thoughts on kind of redshirting him maybe for the first half of your fantasy season? But he's going to be eating up a roster spot.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, hell, Jahmyr Gibbs was like a third round pick last year. And then through, I think, week 6, he was like RB 34. So it was almost like he was redshirted. People were frustrated. At least with Jonathon Brooks, you're not going to be considering him and unsuccessfully starting him. I am still in because I've looked at the landscape here this year. The trend this year is that there are no trends. And when that seems to be the case, I strive a little bit more toward balance. And I think that's a safe, steady route to go. And so I'm a little bit more into the running backs, but they are spread throughout the draft pretty well. So you don't have to go like gaga over it. But a Jonathon Brooks, 7th round, I will say, if you're in a really competitive league, you better be feeling really good about your picks that you've made up until that point. But generally speaking, taking a guy with Jonathon Brooks's pedigree, and talent, and potential upside in the second half of the season when it really matters, I'll sign off on that. I think that's a winning move, even if it doesn't totally work out. It isn't going to crush you. So it's not going to be a league losing move. And it could be a league winning move down the stretch.
You've got Jonathon Brooks as your running back 27. He's sandwiched in between Tajay Spears and Brian Robinson Jr. So, hey, you're in on this kid. And it's one of those things in fantasy where early in the season, you look at it and you're like, oh my God, this guy's not going to help me and blah, blah, blah. Down the stretch, when half the running backs in the NFL are hurt and people are dying to put anybody with a pulse in their lineup, if you can bring this kid out of the bullpen and, he's going to be the future of the Panthers offense, more than likely for the next few years, I think that's a savvy move.
There are always seasons within the season. So I'm thinking Jonathon Brooks, love him for season 3, 4, and 5 of 2024, but do not use him seasons 1 and 2.
Yes. Keep him in your back pocket, just like FantasyPoints.com. We're that ace in the hole, with the rankings, the articles, the Discord that's going to help get you over the finish line. All right. For the Guru, I'm Brian Drake. We'll see you guys next time for the Fantasy Points podcast.